Hi there, my name is Matt Furness and this is The Culture Hack, a video and podcast series that captures experiences and life lessons from those who know culture best. The goal? To help you to understand, design and change your company culture. Thanks for tuning in. Hi everybody and welcome to The Culture Hack. It's Matt Furness here from Click Culture Consulting and I'm delighted to be joined today by Nigel Taberner. So Nigel has spent 30 years with the Greater Manchester Police and around 10 years of that career as a hostage negotiator. During that time, he successfully negotiated over 130 high-risk armed sieges, suicide threats, and kidnap situations. And thankfully, not one person died at any of the incidents that Nigel attended. I'm really looking forward to talking to him today. So welcome, Nigel. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome, Matt. Really nice to see you again. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you. Not too bad. Thanks for coming on. So we will be talking today about your experiences and in particular about what you learned about listening and negotiating, and in particular what that means for people at work and what that means for developing a great culture at work. But first, I'd love if you could just tell people a little bit more about your story and your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can probably tell from the accent. Brought up in the northwest of England. Haven't lost it at all. And from a really young age, for as young as I can remember, always wanted to be a police officer. Never wanted to do anything else. I've got two teenage lads who are really jealous because they say, "Oh, it's not fair. We don't know what we want to do, but you always knew what you wanted to do," and that was the case. Went to school with those intentions and completely blew my exams. Switched on just before my exams, didn't do well at all. And instead of getting the results that I wanted and going to sixth form university and joining my local force as a graduate entry, I was working in a bus building factory just outside Wigan, age 16, lying under bus chassis covered in wood shavings and half-eaten sandwiches. So not what I wanted. But I never lost sight of that goal. So I went to night school, resat exams, took voluntary redundancy when I was 21, and joined the Greater Manchester Police, which was the local force up here, and had a long and varied career. I started off in city centre Manchester, working in the Moss Side area. That was an incredibly challenging area to work in back in the early 90s. A lot of gangland shootings. Lots of young lads lost their lives in tit-for-tat shootings and stabbings. It was an interesting place to work. But we had a great team there, and an amazing leadership, and we'd run through walls for them. We didn't want to get away with anything. We wouldn't get away with anything. But it was a great place to learn your trade. And from there, spent some time working in the riot squad, which was interesting back in the day. And then woke up one morning and thought it's time to grow up, get a proper job, get promoted. So I went to Manchester Airport, where I worked on a protective security detail there. Worked on a quasi counter-terrorist unit that worked underneath the flight path, protecting aircraft in flight from surface-to-air missiles and stuff like that. So a lot of work with the military, and that's where I got a real kind of hunger for working within counter-terrorism, and ended up working within the Northwest Counter-Terrorist Unit, initially in resourcing and planning, but latterly in ports. So I was the head of special branch at Manchester Airport at one point, and the Liverpool Seaports and John Lennon Airport another time. So yeah, a really varied career. Had a great time. Retired in 2021 after 30 years in the Greater Manchester Police. My last 10 years as a hostage negotiator, and that was a really it was a strange world to live in for 10 years.
Sounds good. And it sounds like you've always had that calling of working in the police. And I guess you've been lucky enough to pursue that calling and, with a bit of hard work between the ages of, it sounded like 16 to 21, made sure that you could do it. And so if you left in 2021, tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing since then.
Yeah, so I had a light bulb moment on that first morning in the hostage negotiators course 10 years before I was going to retire from the police. I was sat there listening to the skills that were being taught and the application, and I was just sat there thinking, I know exactly what I'm going to do in 10 years' time because this stuff is absolute dynamite. The
Mm,
skills that I learned as a hostage negotiator didn't just make me a good hostage negotiator. They made me a better police officer, a better leader, a better father, a better husband, a better friend. Because the skills that I was learning transcended all of that. And I could see right from the very beginning, this is dynamite in terms of what this can do for business. And that's what I do now. I share those skills with businesses. I take the lid off hostage negotiation. I don't just talk about what they do. I mean, the stories are jaw dropping, but I don't just tell them stories. We look at the skills and the models and theories that sit behind the stories and how they're applicable in business. And I do that through conference keynotes and speeches and half-day communications masterclasses.
that's great. And what I'd love to do now is explore what are those lessons, what are those skills that people listening in are able to apply so that they can enjoy the same benefits that you've had, both in terms of as a leader and at work, but also outside of work. You say that it's made you a better husband, a better father. So let's go there if that's okay. What are the key skills that you think that you learned as a hostage negotiator that made you more effective in and outside of work?
I speak to a lot of businesses who tie themselves in knots. I'm going into a negotiation. I'm having a negotiation. A negotiation is just a conversation with a purpose. So it's got a structure. So I go into a negotiation and I need to get somebody to like me. I need to get them to trust me. And when I've got them to like me and got them to trust me, then I'm in a position to be able to influence them, to get them to do things very differently. So I never once went into an incident thinking I'm going negotiating with somebody. It was always I'm going to go and have a conversation. If I'm speaking to a man with a gun and I can ignore the fact that he's got a gun, it's a conversation between two people. And it was as simple as that, really. So it's actually breaking it down and saying, okay, going into this situation now, be it a meeting, be it a commercial negotiation, right from the very beginning, what is my branding? How am I going to establish that I'm a good person to work with, that I'm warm, but I can also do what it says on the tin, that I'm competent. So I'm practicing meticulously for that first 60 seconds to make sure that my personal branding and the impact that I want is there. And then from there, it's about connecting with people. It's about getting people to like you so that they open up. If you like me, you're far more likely to trust me. And if you trust me, you're far more likely to be influenced by me.
Mm,
Conversely, if you don't like me, you're really unlikely to trust me. And if you don't trust me, you're never going to do business with me.
mm,
So it's a pretty straightforward process. And it's just underpinned by good emotional intelligence and listening in a way that we very rarely do.
mm,
I mean,
mm.
we say, listening like a life depends, or listening at level 2 is another way we call it. So listening at level 1 is just you having chit chat. It's just kind of rubbish talk, out with mates in the pub or speaking to somebody in the office. You kind of just half listening what's going on and you're dragging the conversation all over the place by asking questions. That's listening at level 1. Listening at level 2 is when we switch it up and we actually start to try and control that conversation so that other person is talking more than we're talking. And we're actually in the moment. We're hanging on to every word. We're seeing what people are saying, but we're cross-referencing that with other things such as body language and listening for those little things. And when you're walking down a corridor on a Monday morning and you say to somebody, "How you doing?" They go, "I'm all right," And most people will go, "Yeah, it's Monday morning, isn't it? We're back here again." I'd like to
Mm,
think you had that conversation with a hostage negotiator. "Hi, how you doing?" "Well, I'm all right, Hang on, whoa, stop. What does mean?
mm,
Why the need for the qualifier? And it's just those little things that we miss because we don't listen. We're not taught to listen. We're not rewarded for listening. it's always kind of a second-class skill compared to the ability to speak and to I've got a load of certificates, big thick pile of certificates of my kids going through school. Not one of them says that they did good listening. It just wasn't something that was valued.
Yeah.
And you can always tell when somebody's not listening, because they'll say to you, "Go on, I'm listening." If you have to tell somebody that you're listening, it's clearly because you're not, and it's very often because we've got one of these in our hands. Go on, I'm listening. You can't multitask when it comes to listening. You've got to give it a time and respect that it deserves, and listening it's the hostage negotiator superpower. It's kind of what makes them different. The number of times that I've been speaking to somebody, and inexplicably after 20 minutes, half an hour, they've said to me, "Can I put the knife down? Can I come out now? Can we end this now?" And I go, "Yeah, sure, come on." And as we're walking towards an ambulance or a police car or whatever it is that we're going to, I'll say to them, "Why? If you don't mind me asking, why? Why did you change your mind?" And the number of times that they'll say to me, because nobody has ever listened to me like that before, is unbelievable. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, it's really sad, I think, that people go through much of their lives and never feel truly listened to and heard. And it sounds like, as a negotiator, hostage negotiator, you were perhaps one of the first people to ever do that. Now, one of the things I would say is, we all know rationally that listening is really important, and we all, I guess, if we were asked, is it important, we would all say, yeah, of course, active listening is really important, and you need to be engaged in what people are saying. But then there's the reality, which is that we don't do that a lot of the time, or many of us don't. And as you've just said, often, we've got a smartphone that's holding us back. I'm curious, what else do you think stops people from really truly listening to somebody else? And what would you suggest to those people who know rationally it's important, but perhaps have those barriers and want to do something about it?
Yeah, so the biggest barrier in business when I go around speaking to businesses is time. So if I'm involved in a negotiation with somebody, I'm trying to drag it out. The longer I can make a negotiation last, the more likely it is I'll get a successful outcome. So that's very different when you're speaking to somebody who's in business. They're very busy people. They've not got a lot of time. They're very often kind of multitasking and jumping from one task to another. And to actually say to them, actually, do you know what you need to do is you need to sit down, you need to listen more. It can be really tough. But you do need to prioritize it. So you need to remove any distractions. If you're distracted with something, if somebody comes to you and they've clearly got something that they need to say, and you're distracted with something, then make time for it. Look, I'm really sorry. I get the impression you've got something you really need to get off your chest, but I'm distracted with this now. Come back at 1 o'clock and let's talk about it. So create that space for it within your calendar and kind of remove those distractions. But the other thing is to see listening as being the massive advantage that it is. If you want to understand somebody, if you want to be able to influence them, whether it's a member of staff or whether it's somebody you're in a commercial negotiation with, whether it's a member of your family, the best thing to do is to understand it from their perspective. And we do that through listening. So it's not a pink and fluffy skill. I get people saying to me all the time, "Oh, these soft skills." No, there's nothing soft about listening. If I'm listening intentionally to find out information about you, which I'm going to use within a negotiation or I'm going to use to influence you, there's nothing soft about that. So I'm going to manipulate the conversation. Oh, I've used the manipulate word. So I'm going to use skills within the conversation to get you talking and keep you talking and to keep the focus on you. Because if I can keep you talking, then you're going to tell me things that you never intended. So I'm going to keep the focus on you. I'm going to keep you talking. If I'm talking more than 20% of the time, I'm doing something wrong. Because if you're talking, I'm learning things. If I'm talking, I'm just repeating what I already know. And all the time you're talking and all the time you're telling me stuff, I'm thinking, what did he say? What did he mean? How can I use it? And that's what I use to influence. So actually, sometimes the biggest thing with listening is actually, don't see it as being a chore. It's not a chore. See it as being the opportunity to gather information, to gather intelligence. So you're actually in a better position to influence people and get them to do things that you want them to do, or get them to stop doing things.
And I think I love all of that, and I've heard several things there. So one is about removing distractions, making it as hard as possible to get distracted by your smartphone or your emails or whatever it is. Second is about truly recognizing the importance of listening and prioritizing it as an information gathering tool. One of the things that I'm aware of is that listening takes our attention, right? It takes it does take effort to do it really well. Like I find that when I'm listening, I feel tired sometimes after the conversation, because you are actually trying to pay attention to everything that's said and how they're saying it. It takes a lot of cognitive effort. And we can't be on nine hours of our workday, and often people are sat in those meetings for 6-7 hours a day. So I'm curious, what are the conversations within which you really have to turn that switch on, and the conversations that you think are the most important ones to really put on your active listening hat?
Yeah, absolutely. Listening can be really tiring. I mean, we used to negotiate for about 12 hours. For a long-running job, we would negotiate for 12 hours before we were rotated out and another negotiator came in. And after that time, you were absolutely exhausted. The number of times that I finished a negotiation, sat in a traffic car, and I was being taken back home and fell asleep in the car on the way back. Because actually being in the moment and listening to that tune is really difficult. So there are a couple of shortcuts around that. And the first one is the sort of stuff that you're listening for. That be intentional about the sort of stuff that you're listening for. Within a conversation when something is just chit chat. But it's knowing when to switch on. So if I'm negotiating with somebody and we're still in that rapport building phase and we're just talking about bits and pieces, maybe about football or something like that, that's just washing over me. But as soon as I start hearing key words that talk to me about areas in which I can influence them, that talk about values and beliefs that they may have, that I could use in order to influence, then you switch on and you're very intentional about listening and being inquisitive. It's about finding out what somebody's why is. When I got to an incident as a negotiator, very often police officers were already there, untrained police officers when it comes to negotiation. All they were bothered about was what somebody was doing and how they were doing it. That didn't really interest me at all, as long as nobody was getting hurt. I wanted to know the why, and just being really inquisitive and getting involved in somebody's story. So my job as a negotiator is to get somebody to open up and tell me their story. And the more I listen, and the more I look like I'm listening, the more they're likely to tell me things. Because if you think about it, if you're chatting to somebody and you like them, you trust them, and you think that they're listening to you, then you will tell them so much more. So I'll just keep bouncing things back. You'll say something to me, I will just echo it. You'll tell me something about your daughter. You start talking to me about your daughter, and you tell me loads and loads of stuff, and I'll just say, "Oh, she sounds like she's the apple of Daddy's eye." So you tell me more, and then when you've done that, I'll say, "Oh, she sounds like she's got you wrapped around your little finger." So you tell me even more. So we're kind of going down that corkscrew, and all I'm using is kind of almost fog language. It's meaningless language that I'm using to deflect the conversation back to you. And if you're intentional and you're really interested, then actually it's a lot easier. I would say if you're getting bored within a conversation, if you're struggling to listen with the conversation, you're probably asking the wrong questions and looking in the wrong areas.
Yeah, I totally agree that summarizing is one of the most underrated skills that we have, and just summarizing what it is that you've heard helps people feel listened to, but it gives them a prompt to continue talking about whatever it is that they want to talk about. as opposed to just asking question after question, which can feel somewhat like an interrogation or an interview, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I've definitely made that mistake in in my early career when coaching people, and it's like, no, you need to show that you've heard and you've made sense of it first, and then you ask the question. Sorry, you're going to say something.
Yeah, so questions are of the devil. When I used to help run hostage negotiators courses, training new negotiators, we used to really get them to avoid asking questions because we're awful at asking questions. And the more pressure we're under, the worse the quality of questions get, and we just end up asking a slew of closed questions and getting very little information for it. So we will use summaries, echoing, paraphrasing, those kind of skills to bounce it back to you. And as well as summaries are amazing. And as well as the advantage that you talked about prompting somebody to carry on talking, sounding like you were listening, because not only am I able to hear what you're saying, but I'm able to articulate it back to you. But it also helps make sense of situations as well, particularly when they're feeling emotional. So I'm a chair of governors at a high school, deal with a lot of parental complaints. So I get an email coming in, and you look at this email, and it's like, the school can't do anything right. There's all these things. If I can get those people in front of me and say, okay, I've seen your email. My understanding is that, and I'll start to kind of go down it, summarising what the issues are. By the time I've got halfway down, they're starting to look a bit uncomfortable. By the time I've got to the top, they're downright embarrassed, because somebody else summarising it back to you makes sense of it. You think, actually, I sound a little bit unreasonable there. I did it a couple of weeks back, and I hadn't even got a third of the way down, and this mum turned around to me, she said, can I stop you there? He wrote this. Pointing at the father. So it just helps people make sense of it as well. And helps you. There's never I've never worked with a negotiator who's not lost his way somewhere in a conversation. Nothing better than having a little whisper in your ear saying, just summarise. You say, hang on, I've been listening to you for the last half an hour. This is what I think you're saying. And the other beauty of a summary is, if you're wrong, they won't bite your head off. If you're wrong, people tend to correct you. Yeah, you were right when you said that, but when you said that my dad had done that, actually, this is what he'd done. So they will correct you rather than bite your head off. It's a really underrated skill.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's because I imagine people appreciate at least you're trying to hear them, as opposed to just sort of sweeping what they've said and trying to move on to something else. At least, even if you've misunderstood, you're at least trying to understand what they're saying. One thing I'm interested in is, a lot of what you've spoken about today is about getting them to talk more and more and more and more, and summarizing and getting them to talk. And I think the percentage used was at least 80% of the time. I'm really curious, were there moments as a hostage negotiator where you thought, I need to share more of myself in order to build a connection, as opposed to just them speaking by themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of a common thing that we actually discuss with young negotiators around personal disclosure. If you're a successful negotiator, a confident negotiator, then you'll be confident in disclosing things about yourself that are going to help you establish rapport. So if I'm talking to somebody, I'm wanting to find out his family circumstances, and he's starting to pour his heart out about his family, and then he turns around and says, "Nigel, have you got kids?" And I turn around and say, "I'm really sorry, I'm not prepared to discuss that."
Yeah.
Then you've got that horrible, nasty disconnect. So clearly, it depends on the sort of person that you're negotiating with. But a good negotiator will take herself to work, and be themselves, but use the skills. And that really helps to kind of establish that connection with somebody. It's all about people at the end of the day. And that's, so I'll be looking for commonality. I'll be looking for things that connect us, because once I've done that, conversation is so much easier, especially with somebody who actually you think you've got nothing in common with whatsoever, which was very often the case as a negotiator. But find something that connects us. And it's exactly the same in business. If you're dealing with a really difficult customer, a really difficult person, the best thing to do is find something that you've got in common. Find something that connects you, and use it. Because ultimately, it's about people.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's the answer isn't to just not talk about yourself at all and get them to talk wholeheartedly about themselves. There are moments within which bits of vulnerability, bits of personal disclosure can help you to build that stronger connection, but that shouldn't overwhelm the conversation. You talking about yourself or saying, oh, and just assuming you know what it's like, to be, the other person, or just saying, oh, I had that. It's about being careful with it.
Absolutely. So it's not about me. It's about them. It is not about me. But it's really important that you recognise that you can never understand what it is like for them. You can never put yourself in another person's shoes. And one thing that you should never hear coming out of the mouth of a hostage negotiator are the words, I understand. Because you can't. This nonsense about walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. You can put my shoes on, you can go and have a walk. All you'll ever understand is what they feel like for you. No matter how far you walk, you'll never understand what they feel like for me. How much they rub at the heel, they pinch at the toe. You'll never understand the sense of relief I get when I take them off at the end of a day. You'll come back, and having had your experience, you'll problem solve from that experience. You'll say, yeah, Nigel, you do rub it right. All you need to do is put a plaster on. There you go, problem solved. You can't. So if I'm negotiating with somebody, I can't even, And so you say, well, what do I say then? Because I say I understand an awful lot. I think it sounds nice. I'm trying to show that I'm being empathic. Well, actually, the best thing to say, counterintuitively, is I can't even begin to understand what that's like for you. Tell me about it. And then let them talk. Let them tell you. Let them tell you what it is like for them. Because at the end of the day, I know what sad feels like for me. I have no idea what sad feels like for you. Unless I ask you to tell me, and I'll leave you room in the conversation to do it, rather than assuming that you feel it exactly the same way that I do.
Absolutely. I see a lot of the most skilled communicators use that trick of saying, I can't imagine how tough that is for you, almost saying, sitting with them, but not assuming you know how they feel. I think that's so powerful. And what we're talking about here is a lot about connection. So we started talking about listening, and now we're talking about connection. Towards the start of the conversation, you spoke about how to connect with them in the first 60 seconds and almost religiously preparing for that first 60 seconds in an interaction. I'm really curious about whether there are any lessons that you think we can take for that first 60 seconds to build a positive first impression in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been loads of academic research done around first impressions, personal branding, impact. That's what we're talking about at the beginning of that conversation. And they all pretty much come back to two things: warmth and competence. How can I show you that I'm a nice person, a good person that is good to work with, but at the same time show you that I'm high performing, I'm capable of doing what it says that I'm capable of doing. So as I'm being driven to a job, I'm aware of some of the circumstances, but I'm sitting there in this car, hurtling towards this job, thinking, what do I need to do? What do I need to be in terms of personal branding to show that I'm high performing and a person who is a good person who wants to help them. And so I'll work out what my opening line is. So I'll be working that out on the way, and I'm practicing it. I'll be practicing it out loud and in the first person, so that when I get there and I open my mouth for the first time, it's not the first time I've heard it. I know what I'm going to sound like. That really helps you in terms of confidence. It makes you sound good. Negotiating is a confidence game. You get there, you deliver your opening line, you sound good, they respond well to it, you're away. So that's why we plan meticulously for that first 60 seconds. And that works just as well in business. If you're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, if you're having a negotiation, if you're having a meeting, then practice your opening line, that first 60 seconds. It might well just be introducing yourself. It might be stating what the purpose of the meeting is. But you're establishing, more than anything, your competence. That's the key thing. You've got to show that you are competent, but also you're a nice person to work with. Yeah,
absolutely. I like how, so it sounds like 60 seconds to introduce yourself, or 60 seconds in the first interactions. There isn't a script for what to follow. However, just to have in your mind a sense of, how am I going to demonstrate competence? How am I going to demonstrate warmth? And then preparing it a few times before that interaction, whether it's a presentation or a meeting, just to make sure that, you know, it's familiar for you. So I'm conscious of time. So a question that I ask all my guests on the Culture Hack is about a culture hack. So what I'd love to do is finish on that. So what's a culture hack that you love? So something that you think can have a massive impact on culture in the workplace, but just actually doesn't take a huge amount of effort.
Yeah, so this is one that I used to use on. People used to say to me all the time, "Does this work on your wife and kids?" Very often saying the kids a little bit, well, the wife maybe not quite so much, but it used to work particularly well on my younger one. And if I sat down at the dinner table and said to him, "Have you done your maths homework?" I would expect to get the usual teenage response to, "Have you done your maths homework?" So I never used to ask that question. I always used to say to him, "Are you doing your homework before or after your dinner?" And the obvious response every time was, "I'll do it after my dinner." He'd finish his dinner, and then without being prompted, he would go off and do his homework. Why? A couple of reasons. One, because he's committed openly to doing it. Yeah, I'm going to do it after dinner. And now he wants to show that he's consistent with that commitment. And the other thing is the perception of choice. The only choice I've given him is doing his homework before he goes to bed, but he doesn't see that. So there's the perception of choice. That works just as well in the business world. When you speak to somebody and say, "When are you going to have that piece of work done? When's that report going to be on my desk?" I'd say to people, "You can have that piece of work on my desk by Thursday or Friday." And they'd say, "I'll have it on your desk Friday morning." And it was a given. It would be there by Friday morning. Or they might turn around to me and say, "Do you know what, Nigel, this is a really complex report you've asked me to put together. And I need to think about it over the weekend as well. It'll be on your desk Monday morning." I've now got a commitment that it will be there. And it will be there on the Monday morning. So it's a really nice little hack, getting somebody to commit to something, rather than saying to them, "When am I going to have that piece of work?"
Great. I love that. It's the, I guess, goes back to what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. We don't like to be out of place with what we say we are and what we say we do. And so if you get people to vocalize it, they're going to want to appear and be consistent as much as possible. So I really do love that one. I am conscious that we could talk about this all day, and I'm conscious of your time and the listeners' time. So do you have any final reflections on our conversation before closing, Nigel?
Yeah, it's about listening. Negotiation, influence is all about listening. If you want to become more influential, then listen to that a little bit more. Listen to what people are saying. Listen like a life depends on it, because they will tell you stuff. They'll be giving stuff away all the time that most of the time we just miss completely. So if you want to be more influential, just spend a little bit more time listening.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you, Nigel. What a lovely note to end on. So just before we close, I want to say a huge thank you to you for sharing your time and sharing your experiences. And if people want to contact you, Nigel, what's the best way of them doing so?
Yeah, so you can contact me through my website, www.nigeltaberner.com.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And so if you like this episode, please do listen to our other episodes for more first-hand experiences and lessons on all things culture. Otherwise, that's all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and go well, everybody.